talk about the blood vessels that you have, we need to talk about where blood is going in your body. And so there are 3 pathways, 1, 2, 3, that you need to be aware of. This is places that blood is allowed to go. The first pathway is the pulmonary pathway, and this involves only the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. And the idea is that normally when blood leaves your heart, it's full of oxygen and it's ready to be pumped to the rest of your body. But in this one specific case, oxygen-poor blood is leaving your heart. And so the pulmonary pathway is where oxygen-poor blood goes to the lungs, and then oxygen-rich blood returns. Now, we've already mentioned that the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein are the exception to the oxygenation rule. The pulmonary artery has low oxygen, the pulmonary vein has high oxygen, and that is because the blood has not yet been to your lungs when it's in your pulmonary artery. Now, the systemic pathway, this is for the rest of your body. And so this is where oxygen-rich blood that comes from the left ventricle goes to your body tissues. When blood leaves your right ventricle, it's going into pulmonary circulation. When blood leaves your left ventricle, it's going into systemic circulation. Anytime you see the word systemic, we're generally talking about your body as a whole. Now, there is also something called coronary circulation, because I want you all to recognize that your heart tissue itself has to have its own supply of blood. Sometimes people forget that because your heart is pumping blood, that there's actually blood in all of the tissues in your heart as well. So just recognize that heart tissue, which is mostly muscle, requires oxygen to function. It's just like any other muscle. And so sometimes people forget things like that your digestive system still needs glucose to work, and that your lungs require oxygen to function and stay living, and that your heart needs to have blood in it. And so even though it's doing the pumping of the blood, there are blood vessels in your heart as well, providing blood to all of those tissues. I am not going to ask you to name every blood vessel in your body. That would be ridiculous. I don't even think I could do that. But I am going to ask you to recognize those major blood vessels that are coming in and out of your heart. So I'm not going to ask you to name all of the little vessels that supply your heart, but just to recognize that there are arteries and veins on your heart providing blood to those tissues. So if you take a look, this picture on the left here is to illustrate to you that blood that leaves your heart on your left side, which is the right side of a picture, so remember this is left and this is right, blood leaving the left side of your heart has oxygen. Blood leaving the right side of your heart has very little oxygen. And so when you look at a picture, you will generally see that the left side of the picture, which is the right side, is colored blue, and the right side of the picture, which is actually the left side, is colored red. And what we're trying to illustrate here is that anytime blood gets to a tissue, now this is not all of the tissues in your body, it's just some examples, but anytime blood gets to a tissue that's going to use oxygen, there should be a capillary net so that gas exchange can occur, and that's the point where the blood will turn from red to blue on the picture. Blood is always flowing, if you take a look, down on this side and up through the vein. Now you have veins and arteries on both sides of your body. So don't think that blood flows down your left leg and up your right leg. It flows up and down on both sides. But so that you know with reference to the heart, what's coming into the left side of your heart, coming into the right side of your heart is always deoxygenated blood, and what's coming out of the left side is always oxygen-rich blood. Now these two pictures here are just to illustrate so that you can see that there are blood vessels on your heart. You have things called coronary arteries and coronary veins. There are more smaller pieces besides that, but your coronary arteries and your coronary veins run across the surface of the heart. You'll be able to see some of these blood vessels when we dissect a heart. But just so you know, anytime you see the word coronary, it means your heart. I think, is anyone in Spanish here? The way you say heart in Spanish is corazón, and so you can recognize the similarity between that word and heart. It doesn't sound like anything in English, but things rarely do, because most of these science words are based on Latin or something else that's more like Spanish or French. Now the next thing that I'm going to show you is a full list in order of where blood is flowing. At first, it's just a list of words, and then I want to show you two different ways to represent this list of words so that it's easier to remember. So, when blood flows through your heart, this is the order in which it goes. First, superior and inferior vena cava. Then, right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, pulmonary semilunar valve, pulmonary artery, lungs, pulmonary vein, left atrium, bicuspid valve, left ventricle, aortic semilunar valve, dorsal aorta, body parts. So you have this list of a bunch of pieces, and you have to know in which order things are going through the heart. The first thing that you should recognize is that the right side always comes first. That's always where where we would start, let's say, because that's where blood enters your heart, and that the left side comes second. If you know that, you should be able to place the atria and the ventricle pretty easily because they have left and right in their names. But beyond that, the names of things, you have to know where they go, what they're attached to. And so there's a number of strategies that you can use. You could memorize what is attached to what, like which valve is attached to which atria or ventricle, which vein is attached to which atria, which artery is attached to which ventricle, which we already mentioned. But sometimes just knowing what order things are going in makes it a little easier. So my first suggestion is that you do something like what I did when I made this mnemonic. This is a real thing that it really happens. It's about a real person that I actually knew. I made a little mnemonic based on the first letter of most of the words. I didn't use every single word in the list because I couldn't think of something to put there. So my mnemonic is based on the first letter of the words that I'm going to circle. So V, C, A, T, V, P, P, L, P, A, B, V, A. Now I left out body parts in my mnemonic because I was just focusing on the heart part. But my mnemonic, which is fairly hilarious, is this: vans, cars, autos, trucks, very pretty people like Patty all believe vans are awesome. And this worked for me because I have a second cousin whose name is Patty. We were at university at the same time. She had a van that was awesome. It looked like something that a creepy person would pick kids up with by luring them in the back with candy. And she was quite pretty. So this was all true statements for me. It was easy to remember. You don't have to use this, but I suggest that you think of a way that you will remember the order that these things go in more easily. A mnemonic could be one way. Now this works for me because I'm a very verbal person. I like words, I'm good with words. Other people might prefer something a little more visual. And so you might say, oh, we'll just, memorize this picture. And I'll say, sure, because I can draw that just freehand without looking at it. I can't. I am bad at drawing. And so I have a way that is easier to draw that would still give you a visual representation of what's happening here. So in my picture, I make a big rectangle and I split it into 4. Why would I do that? There are 4 chambers in your heart. I'm not trying to make it look like a heart. I'm just trying to represent the pieces that are there. So this is my right atrium. This is my left atrium. This is my right ventricle. This is my left ventricle. So I know that there are 4 chambers. I also know that there are 4 valves. Everything came in groups of 4 quite conveniently. 2 of the valves are between atria and ventricle, and the other 2 valves are between the ventricle and something else. So I know that there are 4 valves. This valve is the tricuspid valve. This is the bicuspid valve. The thought that always goes through my head is that that's the opposite of alphabetical order. You would think B should come first, but it actually comes second. Or numerically, this means 3, that means 2. It's going backwards, either alphabetically or numerically. Now the other 2 valves are both semilunar valves, and they're named for the artery that they're attached to. So this is the pulmonary semilunar valve, and this is the aortic semilunar valve. And then I tell myself, well, there's 4 blood vessels. There is a vein, the vena cava, that comes in to my right atrium. There is also a vein, the pulmonary vein, which comes into my left atrium. So veins always come into atria. I also know that there are arteries that leave my ventricles. The artery that leaves my right ventricle is my pulmonary artery. Notice I colored it blue on purpose because it doesn't have oxygen in it. The artery that leaves my left ventricle is my aorta. Now my aorta takes blood to my tissues, and then the blood comes back through the vena cava. My pulmonary artery takes blood to my lungs, and then it comes back through the pulmonary vein. So there are 4 chambers, 4 valves, 4 blood vessels that can all be connected to each other in a picture something like this. So if you prefer something more visual, that is a way that you could represent it without actually drawing a heart, so that you can still see where all the pieces go in order, but you don't have to be an artist.